The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns on the faded wallpaper of Evelyn Carter's modest living room. The scent of brewed coffee mixed with the faint aroma of lilies on the side table, a gift she had bought for herself 3 days ago. At 67, Evelyn had learned to find peace in the smallest details. A clean cup, a warm blanket, a good book, and the chirping of birds outside her window. Her days followed a quiet rhythm, one that had settled in after her husband, Harold, passed away 7 years ago. Since then, her only companion had been the ticking of the clock and the occasional visit from her son, Lucas. She often said he was her reason for breathing, and she meant it. She had worked 2 jobs most of her life, as a nurse during the day and a caregiver for the elderly at night, saving every penny for his future, for his education, his wedding, and maybe one day for his home. But what she didn't know that morning, as she stirred her coffee and hummed softly to the radio, was that Lucas had already taken everything she owned, her savings, her peace, her trust, and was thousands of miles away, smiling for photos with his wife and her so-called best friend, Carol. The first hint of something wrong came as a simple text alert, a soft chime that she almost ignored. Her phone vibrated on the counter, showing a message from the bank app. Available balance, $0.00. Evelyn blinked twice, sure it was a mistake. She had over $95,000 saved. She refreshed the page, her fingers trembling. The number didn't change. Confused, she sat down, her heartbeat quickening. She whispered to herself, "No, that can't be right. I just checked last week." Her hands, wrinkled and strong from decades of work, shook as she called the bank. A robotic voice greeted her first, asking for her account number. She fumbled to type it, pressing each button with a rising sense of dread. When the line finally connected to a human representative, her voice came out hoarse and strained. "Yes, my name is Evelyn Carter. I think there's been a mistake. My account shows zero balance." The man on the other end sounded calm, almost bored, as he read through her account details. "Mrs. Carter, the funds were transferred out this morning. It seems there were several large wire transfers over the past 24 hours. Her lips parted as she whispered, "Transferred? To where?" There was a pause. "To an account under the name Lucas Carter." For a moment, the world around her blurred. The clock ticked louder, her coffee went cold, and in that suspended silence, something inside her, something fragile and motherly, cracked. She didn't cry right away. Instead, she sat completely still, as if her body couldn't yet accept what her mind understood. Lucas, her son? The boy she carried for 9 months, who used to hold her hand at the grocery store and call her mama even when he was too old to, the man she'd supported through college, through heartbreaks, through every poor decision he ever made. The silence in the house felt deafening now. She hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. Her thoughts came in fragments. Why would he do this? How could he do this? She wanted to call him, to hear his voice and know this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But a part of her, a quiet, trembling part, already knew the truth. Lucas had changed since he married Riley. His wife was beautiful, young, and had expensive tastes that Evelyn could never understand. But it wasn't just Riley. There was someone else, someone she'd never thought would betray her. Her best friend, Carol Hayes. Carol had been by her side since high school. They had shared secrets, tears, laughter, and grief. Carol had been there when Evelyn buried her husband, when she celebrated Lucas's graduation, and when she first opened her retirement account. And now that same woman was on a flight with her son, smiling at the camera like a thief who'd gotten away clean. The sound of a notification broke her trance again. Her neighbor, Doris, had sent her a message. "Evelyn, you've got to see this. Check Lucas's Instagram." Evelyn didn't use social media much. She only had an old tablet where she'd watch cooking videos. But she opened it anyway, slowly typing her son's name into the search bar. When his profile appeared, the screen lit up with bright images. Blue water, white sand, golden skies. There he was, Lucas, laughing in a linen shirt, holding a cocktail. Beside him, Riley posed in designer sunglasses, her fingers flashing a diamond bracelet Evelyn had never seen before. And in the corner of the frame, her breath caught. Carol, her lifelong friend, wearing the same sun hat Evelyn had gifted her last summer. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. Family isn't just blood, it's who's there for you when life gets good." Evelyn's heart twisted. Family isn't just blood? She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Carol, her friend, had replaced her, even in words. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt truly alone. Her chest tightened and she pressed her hand against her heart, trying to breathe. Every memory she had with her son, his first birthday, his first heartbreak, his first apartment, flashed before her eyes, each one now tainted by betrayal. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Instead, she whispered, "So this is what love costs." Tears finally fell, slow, heavy, unstoppable. She wept for the years she'd sacrificed, for the nights she'd stayed up to pay bills, for the dreams she'd deferred so he could chase his. She wept until her body shook and her heart went numb. But as the tears dried, something inside her began to change. Her pain hardened into resolve. Her grief turned into focus. She stood up, wiped her eyes, and whispered to the empty room, "You think you've taken everything, Lucas, but you've forgotten who taught you how to survive." Then she turned off her phone and sat back in her chair and began to plan. The night after discovering her empty bank account stretched endlessly, each hour heavy with betrayal and disbelief. Evelyn sat by the window, staring into the quiet street. The world outside carried on as if nothing had happened. Neighbors' porch lights flickered, a stray cat prowled near the garbage bins, and somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of a late-night bus filled the air. Yet inside her house, time had stopped. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock, echoing in the hollow silence that followed the shattering of her trust. She had tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucas's face, smiling, carefree, clinking glasses with the two people who had just stolen everything from her. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. She could have forgiven him for taking money. She'd given him plenty before. But the deceit, the secrecy, the coldness of it all tore her heart in two. She thought of all the times she'd said yes when she should have said no, the times she'd bailed him out, the nights she'd prayed for him to find his way. Now she realized he had found his way, just not the one she'd hoped for. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones. The sunlight that once warmed her home now felt harsh, almost accusing. The flowers on her table had wilted overnight, their petals curling inward like fists. She made coffee but couldn't bring herself to drink it. Her hands trembled as she tried to dial Lucas's number, but she stopped halfway. What would I even say, she thought. Would he apologize? Would he lie? Would he even care? She placed the phone back down, her throat tightening. Instead, she dialed Carol's number. It rang once, twice, and then went straight to voicemail. Evelyn waited for the tone, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Carol, it's me. I don't know what's happening, but please call me back." She hung up and waited. An hour, then two, but no reply came. The silence was answer enough. The woman she'd trusted for 40 years had vanished, just like her savings. And that silence, that absence, was louder than any confession could ever be. As the day unfolded, Evelyn's mind wandered back through the past, replaying moments she had ignored or explained away. Carol's recent curiosity about her retirement account, Lucas's sudden insistence on handling her online banking so she wouldn't have to worry, Riley's forced sweetness during family dinners. The puzzle pieces were all there. She just hadn't wanted to see the picture they formed. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment theft. It was a plan, weeks or months in the making. They'd used her trust as their weapon. Evelyn clenched her fists until her knuckles whitened. A slow, steady flame began to burn inside her. Not the fire of rage, but something colder and sharper. Revenge didn't come naturally to her. She wasn't a cruel woman, but she had spent her life cleaning up other people's messes, forgiving too easily and giving too much. Now she realized forgiveness had only taught them how to hurt her deeper. That evening, she turned on her old desktop computer, the same one Lucas had once set up for her when he was in college. The screen flickered weakly to life. She logged into her email and found dozens of old messages from her son, most of them about money. Each one began with affection and ended with a request. "Mom, I'll pay you back. Mom, I just need a little help this month. Mom, you're the only one who understands me." She scrolled through them, her eyes burning. Somewhere in those words, she had lost herself. She had become her safety net, not her mother. She opened her bank statement again, carefully tracing the transactions one by one. The transfers were neat, methodical, 4 separate wires sent over 12 hours. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. And the IP address, she noticed, was logged from her own home Wi-Fi. They'd done it while visiting her. Probably that Sunday, when they'd brought her takeout and watched a movie together. Evelyn remembered now. Carol had offered to help Lucas check something on her computer while she was in the kitchen making tea. The thought made her stomach turn. "They used my house to rob me," she whispered, a bitter laugh escaping her throat. Her anger slowly transformed into focus. Evelyn grabbed an old notebook from the drawer, one she had used to jot down medical notes during her nursing days. On the first page, she wrote in neat capital letters, "What they took, what I'll take back." Underneath, she began listing every transaction, every date, every person involved. Years of working in hospitals had trained her to notice small details, dates, times, patterns, and now she put that discipline to work. As she documented, she began to remember small conversations that suddenly took on new meaning. Carol once bragged about opening an art gallery with a little extra cash from a friend. Riley had boasted online about their investment trip in Europe. Lucas had once mentioned signing papers for Carol's business to help her get a loan. Evelyn's pen paused mid-sentence. Loan. Signed papers. She frowned and flipped back through her notes. Carol's art gallery. Evelyn had helped her notarize a few documents years ago, back when it was still just an idea. She still had digital copies somewhere. If those papers connected Lucas to Carol's finances, then they had left a trail, and trails could be followed. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt something other than grief. She felt clarity. All her life, people had underestimated her. The quiet widow, the soft-spoken nurse, the sweet old lady. What behind her calm voice was a woman who had raised a son alone, who had navigated loss and poverty, who had learned how to survive when the world forgot her. They thought they could take her money and leave her broken, but Evelyn Carter had been broken before, and she had rebuilt herself every single time. This time would be no different. She stood up, straightened her back, and said out loud, "They want to play games? Then I'll play smarter." The faint reflection of her face in the window caught her eye. Tired, lined with years, but determined. She reached for her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and found a name she hadn't called in a long time. Detective Miles Grayson. He was an old patient she once cared for after his surgery, now retired but still sharp. Maybe he'd know how to help her get started, discreetly. Outside, the evening wind rustled the leaves as Evelyn sat back down with her pen and paper. She wrote one last sentence before turning off the light. "They taught me that love has limits. Now I'll show them what boundaries really mean." The next morning dawned gray and still, as if the sky itself shared her exhaustion. Evelyn didn't wake up to the sound of birds this time, but to the shrill ring of her landline, the one that almost never rang anymore. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up, half expecting bad news. "Evelyn Carter?" she said softly, her voice thick with sleep and sadness. "Evie, it's Miles," came the raspy voice on the other end. "Got your message. What's going on?" Hearing his familiar tone brought a flicker of warmth. Detective Miles Grayson had been one of her favorite patients years ago, a gruff, stubborn man who'd tried to check himself out of the hospital 2 days after a major surgery. She had kept him there by sheer will, bringing him soup and scolding him like a brother. They hadn't spoken in years, but trust built in pain never truly fades. Evelyn exhaled shakily. Miles, I think my son stole my entire savings. There was silence on the line, then a low whistle. You sure? Yes, she said, her voice cracking. And he's not alone. My best friend helped him. He didn't interrupt. He just let her speak, his breathing steady, his occasional grunts signaling he was listening. When she finished, he sighed deeply. You know, Evie, people do worse things for money than you can imagine. But you said something about transfers. Did you keep the records? Evelyn looked at the pile of papers on her table. Every single one. Good, he said. Don't confront them yet. You'll get your chance. But right now, you play dumb and quiet. I'll come by this afternoon. When Miles arrived, the air carried the faint scent of rain. He was older now, grayer, slower, but his eyes still had that sharpness that once made criminals confess before he even spoke. He wore a brown leather jacket and carried a small notebook. Still making your own coffee? I see, he said with a faint smile as she poured him a cup. Always, she replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she set it down. He sat across from her, flipping open his notebook. All right, Evie, walk me through it. She laid out the documents, bank statements, screenshots, notes, each one a breadcrumb leading to the truth. He studied them in silence, occasionally scratching something down. After a long pause, he looked up. Your son's name is on the transfers, but the IP address traces back to your house. They probably used your device, like you said. Smart. Keeps the bank from flagging it. Evelyn nodded, her stomach tightening. What about Carol? Miles flipped to another page. Her name doesn't appear directly in the transfers, but he pulled up her business registry on his tablet. Carol Hayes, owner of Hayes Fine Arts Gallery, established 2 years ago. Financial sponsor listed as... He stopped mid-sentence and looked up slowly. Lucas Carter. Evelyn's breath caught. He funded her? Miles nodded grimly. Looks like he's listed as a silent investor. Probably how they cleaned your money. He wires it, she legitimizes it through fake art sales, and boom, it's clean. Evelyn's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. He used my money to make himself her partner, she whispered. Miles leaned back. I've seen this kind of thing before, Evie. The smart ones don't spend your money. They make it work for them. But they always make mistakes. Always. Evelyn stared at the table for a long time. Her reflection in the polished wood looked like a stranger, weary but burning with a quiet fury. What kind of mistakes? She asked finally. Miles grinned faintly. Paperwork. Pride. People like Carol love to show off. If she's posting photos, flaunting her trips, we'll find something she shouldn't have shown. He sipped his coffee and added, but you can't go at them head on. Let them think you're weak. That's your power now. She nodded, absorbing every word. So what do I do? She asked. You start small, Miles said. Follow them quietly, watch, and record. And if you can, find any document you ever signed for her. Old contracts, loan forms, emails, anything with your name or hers together. That'll be the thread we pull. Evelyn stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulling open a dusty folder labeled personal. Inside were years of memories, bills, receipts, and at the very back, a small envelope marked Hayes Gallery Proposal 2019. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. There it was, a notarized partnership draft between Carol and a financial contributor. The name was blank, never filled in, but attached was a printed email, one from Carol to Lucas. The message was short but damning. Once your mom signs this, we'll have everything we need to get started. She trusts me. This'll be easy. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She handed it to Miles silently. He read it, his jaw tightening. "There it is," he said. "Proof of intent. Enough to open a case if we need." But Evelyn didn't want to open a case. Not yet. Justice through the law was slow, cold, and unsatisfying. What she wanted wasn't a courtroom victory. It was something they'd feel, something that would haunt them. She looked at Miles, her eyes sharp. "You said to play quiet. Fine. But I want to do more than watch. I want to make them regret it." Miles studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Evie. Then we'll do it your way. But no reckless moves. We build this step by step." She smiled faintly. "Step by step? That I can do." He left soon after, promising to dig into Carol's financials from the public side, while she handled the personal one. When the door closed, Evelyn sat in silence again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. She pulled out her old nursing planner, crossed out the word appointments, and wrote a new title across the top: Plan of Retaliation. That night, she began. She started by following Carol's gallery page online. Every new post, every event, every photo tagged with Lucas's name. She noticed small inconsistencies, captions claiming sold-out exhibitions, but the same pieces appearing again weeks later. A charity fundraiser with only a handful of guests visible in the background. Lies dressed as glamour. She took screenshots, made notes, and printed everything. Her desk transformed into a crime board. Photos, notes, strings of red yarn connecting names and dates. It was strange, almost exhilarating to feel alive again, to have purpose after so much numbness. She realized she hadn't felt this focused in years. And as she studied the patterns, one image from Carol's feed froze her cold. A photo of Lucas signing documents beside her, both grinning at a new painting behind them. A painting Evelyn recognized. She had painted it herself years ago, as a hobby. She never sold it. She had gifted it to Carol on her birthday. The caption read, "Another masterpiece sold. Thank you to our loyal clients." Evelyn's lips parted. "You sold my work?" she whispered. Her hands tightened into fists. Now it wasn't just about money. It was about pride, identity, and betrayal stacked upon betrayal. She turned off the screen, her voice steady, almost calm. "All right, Carol. You took my savings, my son, and now my name. Let's see what happens when I take your reputation." Evelyn didn't rush. She understood that the sharpest knives were the ones honed slowly. The first step of her plan would not be dramatic. It would be meticulous, surgical, and patient. She began by creating a quiet persona, Mrs. Bennet, a reserved but affluent collector with a keen eye for provenance. Using an old email account she'd kept for charity auctions, Evelyn wrote to Hayes Fine Arts under the pretext of inquiring about a private viewing. Her message was formal, measured, and intentionally flattering. She praised Carol's curation skills and expressed a discreet interest in acquiring a piece with a documented history. The reply came within the hour. Carol's practiced warmth poured from the screen, an invitation to the next private showing, and a promise that all paperwork and certificates would be provided upon request. Evelyn smiled, saving the exchange. It would be useful later. Next, she called a friend of a friend, a retired appraiser named Ingrid, who owed Evelyn a favor after the time Evelyn had stayed overnight beside Ingrid's ill sister in the hospital. With a soft voice, Evelyn asked Ingrid to attend the private showing, posing as a consultant who would advise a client on authenticity. Ingrid agreed without hesitation. She still respected Evelyn and liked the idea of re-entering the gallery world for an evening. Evelyn told Ingrid to observe everything and to ask specific questions about provenance, invoices, and how recently certain works had entered the collection. The plan was subtle. Make Carol prove what she claimed publicly without signaling that she was under suspicion. If Carol stumbled, if a paper trail was missing, or the same painting reappeared as sold twice, those contradictions would speak louder than any accusation Evelyn could make. On the afternoon of the viewing, Evelyn dressed in a simple navy suit. Nothing showy, nothing that would draw attention, and tucked a small recorder into her handbag. She arrived 15 minutes early and watched Carol bustle about, smoothing tablecloths and adjusting labels with a practiced air. Carol's charm was on full display. She greeted guests with hugs and polished flattery, the kind that made people relax and open their wallets. Evelyn pretended to be enthralled by the room, lingering near a corner where several canvases hung, including the paintings she recognized, the river scene with the slanting willow, the brushstrokes she herself had made one lonely winter when Harold was still alive. The painting had been framed in a tasteful gilt frame and labeled as a recent acquisition. Carol moved through the room, stopping to talk to a couple of local patrons, and Evelyn listened carefully. When Ingrid arrived, she swept the gallery with her practiced eye, asking soft, intelligent questions that sounded like curiosity rather than interrogation. "This brushwork is quite distinctive," Ingrid murmured near Evelyn's painting, leaning in as if to admire detail. "Do you have the provenance for this piece? Any exhibition history?" Carol's smile faltered for a fragment of a second, long enough for Evelyn to feel it chill, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, dear. We keep meticulous records. I'll fetch the gallery's registry and the certificate of sale." She walked briskly to a back office, leaving Evelyn and Ingrid alone with the painting. Ingrid lowered her voice, so only Evelyn could hear. "That signature looks familiar. Could be an amateur move, but the canvas is interesting." Evelyn nodded minutely, playing the part of the intrigued patron. When Carol returned, she held a neat folder with business cards and laminated certificates. She opened it with theatrical care and slid a glossy sheet across the table, a generic certificate claiming a sale to a private collector with a transaction date and a payment invoice attached. Evelyn scanned it, feeling bile rise in her throat. The invoice bore a bank reference number that looked suspiciously tidy, a transaction code rather than a bank statement, and the signature line had a smudged, almost identical flourish to one she'd seen on an old document Carol had given her years ago. Carol explained, fluid and convincing, that several works sold quickly at last month's collector's night, and that the certificates would be forwarded to the buyers once the payments cleared. Evelyn thanked her, asked a few more perfunctory questions, and then, almost casually, inquired about the painting's previous ownership. Carol gave a smooth, rehearsed answer. "Acquired from a private estate. No public record, but fully legitimate." That smile, too practiced, locked into place, tightened Evelyn's resolve. It was the kind of answer that invited follow-up, and follow-up was exactly what Evelyn had prepared. After the viewing, Evelyn waited outside until the last guest had left and the gallery lights were dimmed. Carol locked the door behind her and, seeing Evelyn still there, invited her in for a cup of tea in the small office. They sat across a cluttered desk. Carol's voice softened into confiding tones, telling Evelyn about the gallery's difficult start and the sacrifices she'd made. Evelyn listened, nodding, absorbing every detail as if she were simply the sympathetic ear. Then, with the gentlest delivery she could muster, Evelyn spoke up about the painting. "Funny thing, I used to paint when I had free time," she said, letting the words hang. Carol's eyes flicked toward the framed work behind her, polite interest, somewhere between mock surprise and genuine curiosity. Evelyn continued, softer now. "That piece looks like something I might have painted years ago. I gave one to a friend once. It had the same willow." Carol's fingers tightened around her teacup for the briefest moment, but she covered it with a laugh. "Oh, art is a small world, Evelyn. Maybe it's an homage." Evelyn let the possibility dangle, planting a seed she'd watered for weeks, suggest familiarity without accusation, create a comfortable nudge toward verification. That night, Evelyn began the next phase. She sent an anonymous message to a reputable local arts blogger under the pseudonym Concerned Collector, including a photograph of the painting and a short note. "Has anyone else noticed this painting reappearing under conflicting provenance claims? Curious." The blog had a modest but respected readership. Evelyn also uploaded a high-resolution image of the painting to an online art registry she'd found, tagging it with her own name as the original artist, a small, quiet lie to provoke paperwork. Within 2 days, the automated system flagged multiple entries with conflicting sale histories for the same piece. A thread began to form online, quiet chatter among collectors, and a single pointed comment from an art appraiser named Thomas. If a piece shows multiple sales in a short time, that's often a red flag. Evelyn watched the thread like a hawk, her heart thrumming. She didn't need the internet to explode. She needed plausible suspicion and a paper trail to follow. The goal was not to ruin Carol with gossip, but to force her into explanations and documents she could not truthfully produce. Every keystroke Evelyn made, every anonymous note she sent was a careful step toward exposing the inconsistencies Carol had relied upon. She slept poorly that night, but when she closed her eyes, it wasn't with regret. It was with a steady, cold determination. Evelyn's plan had begun to take root, but she knew better than to mistake the first tremors for victory. True revenge required patience, timing, and the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, not the wild swing of a hammer. The next morning, the faint buzz of her phone pulled her from sleep. It was a message from Miles. "Something's moving. Call me." Her pulse quickened. She dialed immediately, her voice low and steady. "What did you find?" Miles sounded grimly satisfied. "Carol's gallery accounts are being audited. Quietly, not officially yet. Someone tipped off the tax board about inconsistent art valuations." Evelyn almost smiled. "Someone?" Miles chuckled under his breath. "Let's just say an anonymous letter written on expensive stationery carries weight." Evelyn exhaled slowly, absorbing the gravity of what was happening. "How long before they notice?" she asked. "Not long," Miles replied. "But that's not the best part. I found something else. Your son's bank records show large incoming transfers labeled as gallery partnership profits. Only those transfers are from accounts belonging to overseas buyers who don't exist. They're fake. Carol's been using your money to inflate sales, and Lucas is the silent investor on paper, probably signing off to make everything look legitimate. That's fraud, Evie. Big fraud." Evelyn's heart pounded. Fraud was a word that could shatter reputations, freeze accounts, and invite legal ruin, but she didn't gloat, not yet. She exhaled slowly, absorbing the gravity of what was happening. "Then let's make sure the right people see it," she said softly. Miles hesitated. "You sure you want to go this route? Once it starts, there's no stopping it. The gallery, your son, everything connected will burn." Evelyn closed her eyes, and for a long moment she pictured Lucas as a little boy, running barefoot through the backyard, his laughter pure and endless. Before the world had hardened him, that memory used to hurt. Now it fueled her resolve. "Miles," she said finally, "he chose his path. I'm just lighting the lantern so he can see where it leads." The next week unfolded like a slow, taut symphony of secrets unraveling. Carol began posting fewer updates online, and when she did, they seemed forced, the confident glow replaced by a strained brightness. Rumors circulated in quiet corners of the art community. One evening, while scrolling through the gallery's page, Evelyn noticed the comments beneath Carol's latest post. "Isn't that the same painting from last month?" And "Why does every collector have the same initials on the invoices?" The whispers were spreading, small but relentless. The beauty of Evelyn's plan was its invisibility. No one knew where the cracks began, only that they existed. And in the world Carol lived in, perception was power. Once people started to doubt, everything built on image began to crumble. But Evelyn didn't stop there. Her second strike would be personal, designed not to humiliate publicly, but to make Carol and Lucas feel her presence, to haunt them with uncertainty. She drafted a series of anonymous emails under a different alias, The Watcher, and sent them to Carol's private gallery inbox. Each message was short, deliberate, almost poetic. I know where the money came from. The past always finds its way home. Ask Lucas what he told his mother before he left. She scheduled them to arrive at odd hours, 2 a.m., 5:17 a.m., times when the mind is most fragile, when even confidence turns to paranoia. Carol must have told Lucas because within days, Evelyn noticed his social media had gone quiet. No smiling photos, no new trips, only silence. By the end of the week, Miles called again. "Evie, you'll love this. The bank froze their joint account pending verification of source funds. That means they can't touch the money." Evelyn sat on her couch, her teacup trembling slightly. "So, they're trapped?" Miles nodded. "Pretty much. If they can't prove where the funds came from, the IRS will claw it all back." Evelyn let the satisfaction sink in slowly. It wasn't the giddy thrill of triumph. It was colder, steadier, like the calm after a long-delayed storm. But one thing still lingered unresolved. Lucas hadn't called her. Not a word. And that silence, that absence of remorse or even curiosity, stung worse than any theft. That night, she sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the dim glow of her phone. Her reflection in the window looked older, harder, but somehow freer. For the first time in weeks, she felt in control. Then, as on cue, the screen lit up. Unknown color. Her chest tightened. She answered. A shaky voice spilled through the line. "Mom?" It was Lucas. He sounded exhausted, frightened, and very much like a man watching his world collapse. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She let him breathe through the silence, let him feel it. "Mom, please, what did you do?" he whispered. Evelyn closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "I did what you taught me, Lucas. I trusted the wrong person." He said nothing, only breathed raggedly on the other end. Then, after a long pause, he choked out, "We're ruined. Carol's under investigation, they froze my accounts, and people are calling me a fraud." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her tone calm, almost tender. "That must be hard, sweetheart." "Mom, please," he said, voice cracking, "I made a mistake. I'll fix it." You can't fix what you broke. You just live with the pieces. There was silence, the kind that stretches thin between regret and realization. "I'm sorry," he whispered finally. "Not yet," Evelyn said. "But you will be." And then she hung up. Her hand shook slightly as she set the phone down, but her expression stayed composed. She stared out the window, at the faint shimmer of city lights, and whispered to herself, "That's the thing about betrayal. It always costs more than money." But even as satisfaction settled in, a shadow of guilt lingered. She didn't want him destroyed completely, she just wanted him to understand. The revenge was nearly complete, but deep down, Evelyn knew there was one more step, one that would either heal the wound or seal it forever. And as dawn broke over the quiet street, she realized the hardest part wasn't punishing them, it was deciding when to stop. For days after Lucas's desperate call, Evelyn lived in a strange quiet. Not peace, exactly, but a heavy stillness, like the air after thunder when the sky still remembers lightning. The house felt both emptier and more alive. She could breathe again without the weight of helplessness pressing down her chest. Yet her heart hadn't softened. If anything, it had sharpened. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Carol's painted smile and Lucas's hollow apologies, and she knew the story wasn't finished. She had taken their comfort, yes, but not their trust. That was the last string binding them together, and it had to break. So Evelyn turned her focus to what she understood best: human weakness. She knew Carol's pride was her Achilles heel. Without admiration, Carol would wither. Without control, she would unravel. Evelyn's new goal was no longer financial ruin. It was isolation. She wanted Carol and Lucas to turn on each other, to make them feel the kind of betrayal they had inflicted upon her. And so she began again, quietly, methodically, with a new plan. Her first move was simple but strategic. Using another alias, Evelyn contacted Carol's assistant, posing as a potential investor from New York who had heard troubling rumors about the gallery's finances. The email was carefully worded, formal, elegant, filled with subtle implications. Before considering a partnership, I need reassurance that your investor, Mr. Carter, remains legally solvent. There have been whispers otherwise. Within hours, Evelyn received a panicked reply not from the assistant, but from Carol herself. "Who told you that? Those rumors are false, completely unfounded." The panic in Carol's tone was exactly what Evelyn wanted. She didn't reply, of course. Silence is the cruelest confirmation. Meanwhile, Miles had continued his quiet investigation. One afternoon, he stopped by with a folder. "You wanted them to turn on each other," he said, sliding it across the table. "Here's your spark." Inside were copies of Carol's private bank statements, showing wire transfers that Lucas knew nothing about. She's been siphoning some of his profits, too. Classic move. Greedy partners never share evenly. Evelyn studied the papers, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly. "Perfect," she murmured. They trusted each other enough to steal together, but not enough to share. That evening, she printed the records and sealed them inside a plain envelope addressed to Lucas. No name, no return address, only a single note tucked inside. "Still think she's loyal?" She mailed it from a different city the next morning. Days passed. She waited. And then, late one night, her phone buzzed again. This time, not with fear, but with the soft satisfaction of progress. Miles texted, "They're fighting." Neighbors heard shouting. "Looks like he knows." Evelyn set her tea aside and exhaled slowly. It was working. The machine she had built from pain and precision was turning on its own. Through online posts, she could see fragments of the fallout. Carol's once sparkling gallery was now closed for renovation. Her social media had gone silent, and Lucas's profile had vanished entirely. But Evelyn didn't celebrate. Instead, she watched the collapse with the quiet detachment of a scientist observing an experiment she already knew the outcome of. This was what betrayal looked like in reverse, not loud or violent, but corrosive, eating away from within until there was nothing left to hold together. A week later, a knock echoed through her hallway. When she opened the door, Lucas stood there, gaunt and sleepless, a shadow of the confident man who had once betrayed her. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red, his voice hoarse. "Mom, please. I don't know what's happening anymore. Carol's gone. She took what was left and disappeared. I thought she loved me." Evelyn stepped aside without a word. Letting him in, he sank into the same armchair she had sat in when she first discovered the empty bank account. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. "You thought wrong," she said quietly. "You and I both did." He looked up, confusion clouding his face. "I never meant it for it to go this far. It was supposed to be temporary. We were going to put the money back once the gallery started making real profit. But she convinced me—" "Stop." Evelyn cut him off. "You don't get to rewrite it now. You didn't call me when you took it. You didn't call me when you lied. You called me when you were hurting." Her tone wasn't angry. It was precise, each word landing like a pin. Lucas dropped his head into his hands. "I don't have anyone left," he murmured. "Good. Now you know how that feels." But as the night went on, the edges of Evelyn's fury began to blur. Watching her son crumble in front of her, the lines between vengeance and mercy grew harder to separate. He was broken now, just as she had once been. Was that enough? Could she live knowing she had reduced him to the same emptiness she once endured? When he finally lifted his head, tears streaked his face. "Mom, what do I do?" he whispered. She looked at him for a long time, her silence stretching like a test. Then she said, "You start over. You tell the truth. You make it right. Not for me, For you." Lucas nodded weakly, wiping his face. "Will you help me?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. The mother in her wanted to comfort him, the betrayed woman in her wanted to turn him away. Finally, she said, "I'll watch you help yourself." That's all. After he left, Evelyn sat alone in the dark, replaying the conversation in her mind. She realized something unexpected. Revenge hadn't healed her, but it had freed her. The ache in her chest was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had proven something to herself, that she wasn't powerless, that love doesn't mean blindness, that betrayal doesn't have to end in despair. For the first time in years, she felt clarity. She walked to the window, looked out at the quiet street, and whispered to the night, "We're even now." But deep down, she knew the story wasn't truly over. There was one more piece left. Not about money, not even about Carol or Lucas, but about reclaiming her own name, her art, and her peace. Her revenge had dismantled their lies. Now it was time to rebuild her truth. The following morning, the sun rose reluctantly, painting the sky with bruised shades of pink and gray, as if the heavens themselves were unsure whether to celebrate or mourn what was coming. Eleanor stood before her mirror, brushing her silver hair with slow, deliberate strokes. Each strand felt heavier than the last, burdened by memories and betrayal. She was done being the woman who forgave, who waited, who believed that blood meant loyalty. Today, she would act, not out of rage anymore, but out of clarity. Her heart no longer trembled with pain. It pulsed with purpose. She picked up her phone, opened the financial accounts her son had so arrogantly accessed, and began to trace his steps. It wasn't difficult. He had left digital breadcrumbs everywhere. Flights to Rome, luxury hotel bookings, jewelry purchases, even a wire transfer to someone named Clara Benton, her best friend. The name glared back at her like a ghost. Clara had been there through every storm of her life, her shoulder to cry on, her confidant, the woman she trusted more than family. And yet, it was she who had joined hands with her son to rob her blind. For a moment, her reflection blurred through her tears. Then she smiled, a slow, almost eerie smile. "All right, Clara, you taught me to play nice. Now you'll see how well I can play dirty." She spent the next few hours contacting the local police, pretending to be the frail, confused mother of a missing son. In her quivering voice, she told them she feared her son was being manipulated and defrauded by a foreign accomplice. She didn't name Clara directly, not yet, but she sent them copies of her drained accounts, forged messages she had carefully prepared using old conversations, and a trail of evidence that pointed toward financial exploitation. By the time the call ended, the officer had promised to investigate the suspicious transfers involving a woman named Clara Benton. Eleanor hung up, her pulse steady. The first domino had fallen. Then came the second phase, psychological warfare. She opened her social media accounts for the first time in years. Her fingers hovered for a second. Then she began to type a post that would change everything. When you love someone enough to trust them with everything, even your bank account, but they choose betrayal instead. Some lessons come late, but they come sharp. Enjoy Rome, darling. The view's better when you don't owe your mother $80,000. Within an hour, the post had spread like wildfire among her circle of friends, family, and neighbors. People began tagging Jackson and Clara, commenting, gossiping, whispering. By evening, Jackson's wife had deleted her Instagram account. Clara's business page was flooded with angry comments accusing her of manipulation. Eleanor watched it unfold from her old recliner, sipping tea as if she were watching a movie she had already seen the ending to. But what Eleanor didn't expect was how fast karma would move. 2 days later, she received a call from Jackson, his voice broken, panicked, desperate. "Mom, please, you have to help me," he cried. "They froze my account. The police came to the hotel. Clara's being questioned, and the embassy's involved." She could hear chaos in the background. A woman shouting, another crying, doors slamming. Eleanor's lips curled slightly. "Oh, Jackson, maybe this is the lesson you needed. Money earned dishonestly never stays. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but it cut through him like ice. He stammered something about returning the money, about being tricked, about Clara convincing him it was a harmless loan. Eleanor said nothing. Silence was her final weapon. That night, she sat on her porch, watching the stars appear one by one. The air smelled of rain and redemption. She thought of her late husband, of all the years she had spent carrying this family on her shoulders, only to be stabbed in the back by the two people she trusted most. But even through the ache, there was something liberating about it, like she had finally stopped pretending that love required blindness. She smiled faintly to herself. "You took my money, Jackson, but I took your peace." Across the ocean, her words might as well have echoed through the Roman night. Jackson's trip had turned into a nightmare. Clara was under investigation, his wife was furious, and their luxurious vacation had become a spiral of accusations and fear. The once sweet taste of betrayal now felt bitter in his mouth. And Eleanor? She simply slept soundly for the first time in weeks, the hum of the night replacing the ticking of her guilt. The game had only begun, and the mother everyone underestimated was about to prove that revenge, when served with patience and grace, was the most exquisite justice.
3 days later, as dawn crept gently through the curtains, Eleanor awoke to the sound of her landline ringing again. It was a sound that once filled her with anxiety, but now it only stirred quiet satisfaction. She reached for the receiver slowly, as if savoring the moment. "Mom?" Jackson's trembling voice came through, weary and hoarse. "They took Clara's passport. They think she stole the money. She's blaming me, saying it was all my idea. I swear, Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted a better life. She said you wouldn't even notice." His voice cracked mid-sentence, a sob caught between guilt and fear. Eleanor said nothing for a while. She wanted the silence to weigh on him, to force him to feel the same emptiness she'd felt when she saw her account at zero. "You wanted a better life?" she finally said, her tone steady. "Then why didn't you build one, Jackson, instead of stealing mine?" Her words fell heavy, deliberate, each one a dagger made of truth. He tried to speak, but she cut him off. "You didn't just take my money. You took my trust, my dignity, the years I worked to give you something better than what I had. And for what? To impress a woman who would sell you out the moment things got difficult?" Jackson sobbed again, muttering apologies, but Eleanor wasn't listening. She was watching the steam rise from her teacup, thinking of how fragile it looked, and how quickly it vanished, like loyalty in her son's heart. When he stopped crying, she asked one simple question. "Did you ever stop to think about what your father would have said if he saw this?" The line went silent. Then she heard him whisper, "Please, Mom, tell me what to do." Eleanor leaned back, her lips curling slightly. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not to hurt him further, but to make him see. "You'll go to the embassy, and you'll tell them everything, every transfer, every lie. You'll sign whatever papers they give you. And when you come home, you'll face me like a man." He hesitated. "And Clara?" he asked weakly. Eleanor's eyes darkened. "Clara can face her own consequences. She knew what she was doing. Let her taste the same betrayal she helped feed." She ended the call without waiting for a response. For a long while, she sat in the quiet, listening to the soft ticking of her clock, the sound of time taking back what was stolen. Over the next few days, the stories spread like wildfire. Clara's reputation crumbled, her small business shut down, clients withdrew, and her carefully crafted social image disintegrated under the weight of suspicion and scandal. Eleanor didn't have to lift another finger. The world did it for her. As for Jackson, he returned home a broken man, sinner, hollow-eyed, and stripped of arrogance. He stood on his mother's doorstep one rainy afternoon, his clothes damp, his hands shaking. When Eleanor opened the door, Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years of pain between them seemed to hover in the air like a physical presence. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Eleanor studied him quietly. The boy she once tucked into bed, the one who promised to make her proud, stood before her as a stranger, but also, perhaps, as a man who had finally understood. She didn't invite him in immediately. Instead, she said softly, "You took from me what you didn't earn. Now you'll earn it back." She gave him a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a list of local charities that needed volunteers. "Start here. Work. Help. Learn what it means to give, not take." Jackson's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't of guilt, they were of remorse. He nodded silently. "I will, Mom. I swear." She turned to walk back inside, but paused at the doorway. "And Jackson," she added without looking back, "don't call me Mom until you've earned that word again." As the door clicked shut behind her, Eleanor felt something shift inside. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but release. She finally let go of the weight she had carried for years, the guilt of being too soft, too forgiving. She had given her son life, and now she had given him the hardest lesson of it. That night, she sat by her window watching the rain slide down the glass. Her phone buzzed with a message from the police. "Case against Clara Benton officially closed. Funds in process of recovery. Expect partial return within 10 business days." Eleanor smiled faintly. It wasn't about the money anymore. It never really had been. It was about reclaiming her power, her peace, her self-worth. For the first time in years, she slept soundly, her heart lighter than it had been in decades. But she didn't know that fate still had one final twist to offer, something that would test everything she thought she'd learned about forgiveness, love, and revenge. The morning sunlight broke through the curtains like a hesitant apology, brushing softly against Eleanor's face. For the first time in months, she woke without that tightness in her chest, the one that felt like betrayal and heartbreak rolled into one. The air felt lighter, her home quieter, almost peaceful. She made her tea slowly, humming an old tune her husband used to whistle. But peace, she knew, was never permanent. It was a visitor, kind but fleeting. Around mid-morning, a knock echoed through the house. 3 soft taps, then silence. Eleanor frowned and walked toward the door, her hands still damp from washing dishes. When she opened it, her breath caught. Standing on her porch, drenched in rain despite the clear sky, was Clara Benton. The woman she once called her best friend looked nothing like the glamorous, confident friend from before. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen, and her expression raw, pleading. "Ellie," Clara began, her voice breaking. "Please, let me explain." Eleanor didn't answer. She stepped aside silently, allowing her in, but her gaze was ice. Clara hesitated, then entered slowly, her heels clicking on the wooden floor that had once echoed with laughter and secrets shared between friends. They sat across from each other, the air thick with unspoken words. For a long moment, the only sound was the slow tick of the wall clock, a cruel reminder of the years of friendship now reduced to fragments. Finally, Clara spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her hands trembling. "Jackson came to me desperate. He said he wanted to help his wife, that you wouldn't understand. I thought I could guide him, make the transfer temporary. But then," she paused, tears welling up, "he got greedy. I tried to stop it, but it was too late." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me, Clara," she said quietly. "You were supposed to be my friend, not my thief. You sat at my table, you held my hand at my husband's funeral.
You told me I was family." Her voice trembled for the first time. "And all that time, you were planning to empty the only thing I had left." Clara shook her head desperately. "No, Ellie, I swear. I didn't take a penny for myself. It was your son. He said he'd pay it all back. I was foolish enough to believe him. And when things fell apart, I panicked. I didn't have the courage to tell you." For a moment, Eleanor's anger faltered. She searched Clara's face, the wrinkles of regret, the exhaustion in her eyes. There was truth there, mixed with cowardice, but truth, nonetheless. "You could have stopped him," Eleanor said, her tone soft, but cutting. "You could have told me before it destroyed everything." Clara nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that." Eleanor rose from her chair, walked to the window and stared outside. "You know," she said after a long silence, "revenge feels good at first. It burns hot, makes you feel powerful. But when the flames fade, all you're left with is ash and questions." She turned back toward Clara. "Why did you come here, Clara? You got your punishment. Your business is gone. Your name ruined. What do you want from me now?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Forgiveness." The word hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's heart ached, not with anger, but with something deeper, more complex. Forgiveness. The one thing she hadn't even offered herself yet. She looked at Clara and saw not just a betrayer, but a broken woman crushed under her own guilt. Slowly, Eleanor sat back down, her eyes glistening. "Do you remember when we were 35, and I told you that if I ever lost everything, I'd still have you?" Clara nodded, sobbing quietly. "You were wrong." Eleanor continued. "You took that last piece of me too." A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Eleanor sighed and reached for her cup. She murmured, "But I suppose holding on to hate would mean letting you steal even more from me." She set the cup down and met Clara's eyes. "I forgive you, Clara. Not for you, but for me. Because I refuse to let your choices keep poisoning what's left of my peace." Clara broke down completely, falling to her knees, clutching Eleanor's hands, whispering "thank you" over and over through tears. But Eleanor didn't feel warmth. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't healing. It was surrender. It was choosing to stop bleeding. As Clara left that afternoon, Eleanor stood at the window again, watching her disappear down the street. Something in her heart shifted, lighter, but lonelier. That night, Eleanor opened her old photo albums. There were pictures of Clara and her from decades past, birthday cakes, road trips, weddings, and Jackson, so young, so bright-eyed. She touched his face in one photo and whispered, "Maybe one day, I'll forgive you, too." Then she closed the book and turned off the lamp, letting darkness fill the room. But as she drifted off to sleep, a strange thought crept into her mind, one she couldn't shake. Clara's confession revealed something strange. Jackson's words about wanting to help his wife didn't quite match the story he told Eleanor. There was more to this, something hidden beneath the surface, and deep down, Eleanor knew her journey of revenge might not be over just yet. Something darker was waiting to be uncovered. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Eleanor tossed and turned, haunted by fragments of Clara's words. He wanted to help his wife. The phrase echoed in her head, overlapping with Jackson's own excuses. Something didn't fit. If Jackson truly wanted a better life, why had he been so desperate, so reckless? And why did Clara seem genuinely unaware of certain details, like where the final transfers went? The truth, Eleanor felt, was still hiding in the shadows, and she couldn't rest until she dragged it into the light. The next morning, she brewed her tea and sat by the window with her old laptop, determination lighting her eyes. Years ago, she'd helped Jackson set up his first email account, teaching him passwords, security questions. She still remembered most of them. It didn't take long before she managed to access his inbox. The flood of unread messages was overwhelming, but one in particular made her blood run cold. A bank statement from a private hospital marked confidential. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The transactions weren't for vacations or jewelry. They were for medical bills, some dated months before the theft. Her breath caught. Scrolling through the documents, she saw detailed statements, tests, procedures, prescriptions, all for one name: Lena Price, her daughter-in-law, the young woman Jackson had married against her advice, the one she believed had turned him greedy and entitled. But the hospital's logo made her heart pound harder. Los Angeles Oncology Center, cancer treatments, radiation sessions, chemo, all paid in full by the money Jackson had stolen. For a long while, she just sat there, frozen. Tears welled in her eyes, but not out of sorrow, out of shock, confusion, and something dangerously close to guilt. Her son hadn't robbed her for luxury. He'd robbed her to save his wife's life. Slowly, she covered her mouth with her trembling hand. "Oh my God," she whispered. The realization struck her like thunder. All her anger, her revenge, her satisfaction at his downfall, and all the while he'd been drowning in desperation. But even as the truth sank in, another wave of realization followed. Why didn't he just tell me? She thought bitterly. Why lie? Why involve Clara? She opened another email, this one from Jackson to Clara, dated before the transfer. The message was raw, frantic. "She's getting worse. The doctors won't continue treatment without payment. Mom won't help me, not after how she looks at Lena. Please, Clara, you're the only one she listens to. We'll pay her back, I swear. Just don't tell her yet. I can't let Mom know how bad it is. It'll kill her." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, tears streaming down her face. The world seemed to spin. All this time, she had seen betrayal, but maybe it had been fear, shame, and misplaced pride. Jackson hadn't wanted to disappoint her. He had wanted to protect her from the pain of watching his wife die. And Clara, perhaps she had truly believed she was helping him. The theft, the lies, the chain of destruction, all born from love twisted by desperation. Her revenge now felt hollow, meaningless. She had destroyed Clara's reputation, turned her son's life into chaos, and celebrated as they both crumbled, without ever knowing the full truth. The taste of victory turned to ash in her mouth. She covered her face and sobbed quietly, the kind of cry that came from a place deeper than anger, from regret. Hours passed before she finally gathered the strength to call Jackson. When he answered, his voice was tired, wary. "Mom?" he said softly. "Why are you calling?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Because I know the truth now, about Lena, about the hospital." There was silence, then a sound like a choked gasp. "How did you—" "I went through your emails. I had to understand why you did it." Jackson's voice broke. "Mom, I didn't want you to find out this way. I didn't want you to worry. Lena, she's been fighting it for a year now. We tried everything, but the bills—" His words trailed off into sobs. "I just wanted to save her." Eleanor closed her eyes, tears falling freely. "And instead," she whispered, "you lost everything else." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The weight of their choices hung between them, thick and unrelenting. Finally, Eleanor said, "Come home, Jackson. Bring her with you. No more lies. That evening, as she prepared the guest room, Eleanor's mind raced through memories of Lena, her shy smile, her gentle manners, her quiet laughter that once filled our house. She realized how cruelly she had misjudged her, how quickly she had blamed her for Jackson's downfall. But now she wanted to make things right, no matter how late it was. As night fell, Jackson's car pulled into the driveway. Eleanor stood on the porch, trembling as she saw her son step out, his arm around a frail, pale Lena wrapped in a scarf. The sight broke her. She rushed forward, tears spilling, and hugged them both. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again and again. Jackson held her tightly, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry too. Mom, I should have trusted you." Under the porch light, three broken hearts held each other, silently mending years of misunderstanding. Revenge had given Eleanor power, but truth gave her peace, and in that moment she knew which one mattered more. Yet deep inside, she also knew fate was rarely kind twice. This reunion, fragile and beautiful, might not last forever, because illness, unlike betrayal, couldn't be undone. The days that followed were slow, quiet, and filled with a bittersweet tenderness Eleanor hadn't felt in years. Her small home, once echoing with emptiness and regret, now held the fragile warmth of forgiveness. She cooked for them, tended to Lena's comfort, and spent hours just sitting together in the garden, talking about ordinary things, recipes, movies, old memories of Jackson as a child. Sometimes laughter would slip through the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Other times, silence would fall heavy, reminding them of the shadow that still loomed, Lena's illness. Eleanor could see the toll the disease had taken. Lena's once bright eyes were dimmer now, her frame delicate as glass. Yet there was an unshakable strength in her spirit. "I wanted to thank you," Lena said one afternoon, her voice soft but steady, "for taking care of us, for forgiving Jackson." Eleanor smiled faintly, tucking a blanket around her shoulders. "Forgiveness isn't easy, dear, but hate is heavier. I've carried it long enough." Lena nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He didn't mean to hurt you. He was so scared." Eleanor reached over and held her hand gently. "I know, sweetheart. Fear makes fools of us all." That night, Eleanor found herself awake again, staring at the ceiling. The memories of her revenge, the phone calls, the lies, the satisfaction she'd once felt, came flooding back, now like poison. She had punished without knowing, and in doing so, she had almost destroyed what little family she had left. But perhaps, she thought, that was life's cruel mercy, to teach wisdom through pain. She turned toward the window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. For the first time, she prayed, not for justice, but for peace. Over the next few weeks, Lena's health declined sharply. The laughter grew rarer, the silences longer. Jackson stayed by her side constantly, his once proud face hollowed by sleepless nights. Eleanor watched him with a strange mix of sorrow and pride. He was learning what love truly meant: sacrifice, humility, and devotion. Sometimes she caught him crying quietly, clutching Lena's hand, whispering promises that even he knew might not be kept. She wanted to take away his pain, but some lessons, she realized, were meant to be lived, not taught. Then, one cold morning, Eleanor awoke to a stillness that felt unnatural, the kind that comes before grief. She walked down the hallway, her heart thudding in her chest, and saw Jackson sitting beside Lena's bed, his head bowed, her hand limp in his. The look on his face said everything. Without words, Eleanor sat beside him and took his other hand. For a long time, they just sat there, a mother, a son, and the memory of a woman who had been both the cause of their pain and the bridge that healed it. The days after the funeral passed in a blur. People came and went, offering condolences and casseroles that went uneaten. Eleanor stayed strong for Jackson, though her heart felt heavier than it ever had. She thought of Lena's soft voice, her courage, her gratitude. The house felt empty again, but this time it was the gentler kind of emptiness, the kind that came after closure. One evening, Jackson approached her in the garden, his eyes red but calm. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. I want to make things right. For you, for Lena. I want to help people who can't afford treatment, people like her." Eleanor looked up, startled. "You mean—" He nodded. "I'm starting a fund in her name, the Lena Grace Foundation. I'll work day and night to make it real. Maybe I can make up for what I did." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She reached up and cupped his face, smiling through her sadness. "That's all the redemption I ever wanted from you, Jackson, to build something good out of the pain." Months later, the foundation began to take shape. Local hospitals partnered with it, volunteers poured in, and slowly Jackson found purpose again. The same man who once stole out of desperation now worked tirelessly to give hope to others. Eleanor watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years. One sunny afternoon, she visited the small office that bore Lena's name in gold letters. Jackson was there, sorting papers, looking every bit the man she had always hoped he'd become. "You did it," she said softly. And he smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "We did it," he corrected. That night, as Eleanor sat alone on her porch, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "I thought revenge would give me peace, but it only gave me noise. Forgiveness, that's what finally made the silence beautiful." She closed her eyes and let the night breeze wash over her, carrying away the last traces of anger, regret, and guilt. Her story had started with betrayal and ended with grace, proof that even the deepest wounds could bloom into something good if only one had the courage to face the truth. And as the crickets sang softly in the dark, Eleanor Price smiled to herself, whispering into the quiet, "You took my money, Jackson, but you gave me my heart back."